So I chose Yasna 32 uh, because it best shows uh, the, so to speak, bag of tricks, um, the very interesting and often intricate devices that Zarathustra is using in his poetry. Uh, so that, for example, um, intentional ambiguity is fairly frequent in the poem, um, and you know, somewhat more so, and somewhat more of the enigma uh, is involved in this particular poem than in other poems. So, in a way, it's a showcase of some of these very interesting and often quite subtle uh, devices. So, in the first stanza, uh, what one must understand is there is an ambiguity uh, in the last uh, line, in the C line, with regard to the word dario, which is means holding and is a plural. And what is this holding business? So uh, we already understand that uh, if one follows the word order with regard to this pronoun ahia of that one, then the noun or the noun phrase that follows is a nominative subject of the word to entreat. So you have entreaties by family, community, and tribe, and also by demons. Mahmi Mnoi, at my something like prompting, at my calling to mind, initiating something mentally. Meaning Zarathustra says he started a situation whereby there's all these groups, and if I'm right, including a demonic group, who entreat for the bliss, and you have to read that word urwazma as vrasma with an initial w sound. They all entreat for the bliss of Mazda Ahura. And then there's a quotation. Let us be your dutas, holding, let us be thy dutas, holding your, those who are inimical to you. What has to be understood, and it can be better understood if you come from the earlier poem, Yasna 46, in which the root dar, to hold, occurs in several meanings. Within the space, I think it's stanzas 3, 5, and 7, the word dar varies in its meaning from supporting to grabbing onto so as to injure, so holding, restraining. So the reader, so the hearer, having known the earlier poem, ideally would remember that the previous poem used the root dar in several ways. And that's so. Does dar mean supporting, holding up, maintaining? Or does it mean holding back? And the answer is yes. Yes, both possibilities. When you now have to imagine two groups, one demonic, one not demonic, making this declaration so as to get the bliss of Mazda Hura. And the word du tongho, the plural, can mean messengers or obscurations, literally smoke. So the bad group says we'll be, as it were, smoke to thee, and we will uphold or cling to those who are inimical to you all, you plural. Why thy and you? Because the theology involves Mazda Hura as a singularity, as a single entity, therefore thou, and Mazda Hura plus good mind plus rightness, or more fully, best rightness, is a plurality, therefore you. So you get a lot of stuff packed into the first stanza. First, the syntax must be unscrambled, because the syntax, especially of the word daiwa, is ambiguous. If you get that wrong, then you can go no further in the poem. It's as though that's a test. And once you see what's happening there, the gates open and you can proceed to the rest of the poem with understanding. And then the other thing is the theological address to a singularity and a plurality. This occurs later on in the poem when you have thou and you. So there's enough enigma, if you take enigma as, a riddle that you have to solve, enough enigma already. On top of that, I think that there's something very curious going on that is encoded in the first stanza, and really is, as far as I can see, really at the borders of what can be, on the one hand, posited by the poet, and on the other hand, perceived by the audience. That the poet posits it, I'm sure. How many perceived it, I don't know, but I perceived it. So if I, who am not in that world, can perceive it, well, I should think that his patrons in that generation, when his followers were actually present and could interact with him out of the frame of the poem, I think at least some of them got it. Lou, do you remember what I'm referring to? It has to do with initial sounds. If you look at the last four words of the first stanza, and of the first line, and the last four words of the second line, you notice this. You get an a, ors word and an a word which ends in mna. In the next group of four, you get a mna word, an ahurahia, which sort of echoes the ahia, the rasma, which is consonantly like urzanim, and mazda, which gives you a ma. And I think that what is happening is that these are encoded initials, and there are clear examples of the combinations of the a-w and the w-m and the m-a. Well, Mazda Hur is all over the place, but serial alliterations of words that begin with w and m, w-m, are in other stanzas, and you also see one poem in which there's very clear a-w, a-w, a-w alliteration. Never mind what the words mean, but the initials are there, and it's no coincidence that w-m are the initials of wahumana, good mind, and awa of ashawahishta, best rightness. So, from a cognitive viewpoint, that one could conceive that a-w overlaps then with w-m. So you take the w of the a-w phrase, take that w, and then see the m follows it, so you get now a w-m, and then from that m-w, you get ma-a. So you get, whereas in a mat, that's w-m, then mat ariamna, you get ma-a. Similarly, mnoy ahurahia, m-a, ahurahia, rasma, a-w, rasma, mazda, w-m. So if these indeed are meant to be perceived as overlapping, and the similarity in sounds sets that up, as it were, then I maintain that this overlap of the encoded initials of the entities Mazdahura, Wahumana, and Ashawahishta, the overlap of these, the intertwining of these, is symbolic of the fact that they're all interconnected. And that interconnectedness is made explicit in the same, in the next stanza, in stanza 2. So that's pretty intricate stuff. And its component parts with regard to the symbolism of initials is broken down in other poems. This combines them all. So I'll rest there for a moment if there are any comments about that. So that first stanza is just packed full of stuff at various levels, phonic, syntactic, most obviously, and lexical. What the words mean, what is duta, what is dar. Yeah, Olga.
Okay, so you are ascribing sophisticated abstract thinking to a poet who lived in the middle of Central Asiatic steppe at the
primitive.
time and at the time of
Atmosphere. Yeah.
extreme antiquity. So
Yes.
what is your ground for doing so?
Huh. My ground for doing so.
Yeah, because you say this embezzlement of initials of the deity.
Interlocking, or yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah,
call it. Yeah, it doesn't.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Or, for example,
You're using the
uh,
word bezel as the thing you put a gemstone into. Yeah.
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 Or, or,
Using it, yeah.
for example, when a pronoun can be read as both I and thou.
No, it can't be read as I and thou, but let's take your question. It's a good question. I mean,
Well, I'm just illustrating it because when relationship to a deity as plurality and singularity, this is not something which existed before him. So how could he possibly come up with such things? It's
so
abstract
that's one
theology.
question. That's
Yeah,
one
okay.
question. How can he come up with the idea of a divinity uh, who is both singular and plural? That's one question.
Yeah, okay.
Uh,
And
but
then the other
there are a
more.
few other questions involved here. You're saying, um, how can this have taken place in very remote antiquity, when people uh, are uh, so different way back then from us modern sophisticates?
Well, that's what you said. What I
Wait,
say is that
didn't
there
you
is
ask
a
that? Didn't you imply that question?
I I wanted to know what's your ground for ascribing him these modes of thinking, not
Okay.
because the people
Let's
are.
start with one
Bec
mode at a time. Yeah, go ahead.
let me fully explicate, because there is a history of philosophical thinking which we believe is becoming more and more sophisticated, elaborate, abstract. There is a development of ideas through history. And so here is this um, antique person. How do you know that these modes of thinking are his and not something that you attribute to him based
Hmm.
on his linguistic faculties?
Fair enough. Um, and by way of anecdote, I had a good colleague, uh, Neil Mackenzie, David Neil Mackenzie, uh, who a long time ago looked at my data, and I tried to explain my data to him, and he said, Schwartz, you're attributing to this innocent primitive your uh, your your urban sophistication. Uh,
Yeah,
he stopped short of saying your cosmopolitan urban sophistication. Uh, uh, Not that he had any anti-Jewish bones. He did not, but it was like, Schwartz, you're a New. Oh, he said, you're a New York Jewish intellectual. You know, how can you attribute such intellectuality to this primitive man? And he admitted that he's not particularly a Westernist. That wasn't his special angle in Iranistics, but he did voice this question. Um, and I liked it because it was out straight out there, no, no,
Well,
no.
it is straight out there, yeah.
Yeah. Louis, can we not hear you?
Get this. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
So
the issue for me in the complexity of the poem is some of the larger structure, the ring structure, the scrim that you're using, the issue of assonance or use of repetitive vowels or alliteration, that's found in as ancient as you can go.
right.
Um, I mean, it's in Gilgamesh, it's in the Vedas.
Well. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, people have written about that, about uh, alliteration, assonance in the oldest poems that we have. So the notion of using assonance or repetition or alliteration is as old as poetry, and the use of mnemonic and harmonic and beauty features of language.
I like the
The issue,
mnemonic. Yeah, go ahead. I like
but
them.
the issue for me is how uh, that has served the spiritual message that Zarathustra wants to convey. That's why I'm focusing on the centrality of, the center of the poem, because it seems to me that the fuel for the engine of this construction was a spiritual message. And so I'm interested in how you put it together with a spiritual message. And to that, and by the way, I love the notion of the use of smoke, the word for smoke and messenger, because in the sense that if you're going to hold back those inimical to you, that smoke is a way of holding them back. Uh, that that's a great use of language play. I'd
Moreover,
like,
why do I think, I mean, one of the reasons I think there's a double entendre here is that the same word duta reoccurs in the ring composition uh, later on in the poem, uh, adjoining a stanza referring to burning of a substance, ritual burning of a substance. I know what substance it was, and I know what
yeah,
burning it was. Uh, eh,
yeah. I mean, I think the smoke thing is great, but I would like to press you to just translate in English that is not poetic, but that gives the meaning of the first stanza. Because when I look at Insler or the other translation, it's very confusing.
okay, uh, but you have to understand that a single translation of each line will not do it because the last line has two different meanings and is supposed to have two different meanings. And that is very important. Uh, Now, let me back up a little here. We have a lot of things on the table. Um, in answer to your question, Olga, how do I know? I I had, looking at the whole corpus, already observed that you get coded, I repeat, coded uh, patterns of uh, two initial sounds elsewhere in the poem where there is a decoding, which is to say that you get wuma, 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 with the denouement wahumana or wahumana. And where you have awa, it has artaune wahishtam or something of the sort, where you have the word which represents asha. Asha is really arta historically, and wahishto, in a different different syntax, but you have as it were, the asha. Well, it's ashauna. It's asha anyway. It's not arta. Ashauna and wahishta, that decodes it from the beginning. So the observance of these coded, I repeat, patterns of by consonantal alliteration already makes me understand, gives me a precedent for what is going on here. What is going on here is that all the more. And the decoding is in the second stanza. Now, with regard to alliteration, yeah, sure. There's plenty of alliteration in the Rig Veda. There's obligatory alliteration in Old Germanic poetry. It's not a big deal in itself, alliteration. What that is ultimately about is an interesting question, but it's really at a level that is, I think, too general for the present problem. What you must see is that the alliteration is coded. It is symbolic. You find that in Gilgamesh? I doubt it. Huh?
I'm not suggesting that the coding is there in Gilgamesh, but that people who write about ancient poetry note that the Vedas and Gilgamesh
No, I mean,
have
so
assonance.
big deal. But what's going on here is not merely that there's assonance and alliteration, that there's a specific symbolism having to do with the initials and the theological entities.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
So I built up the
No,
case.
I get that, but the notion is that he is building on a tradition in poetry that is
No,
already there.
no. He's building on something that he, as it were, invented. It's not merely alliteration, it's that he has already taken the idea of using the initial sounds of his theological entities, of his three theological entities, in a symbolic manner. Now, one can talk about the importance of initials, but this technique, this symbolic use of initial sounds, it's not in the closest corpus, which is the Rig Veda. You don't find it there. Nor do you find it in the post-Zarathustrian Avestan material. So he's building on an idea that he came up with, namely, why don't I use the initial sounds of my words and foreground them? So you get a kind of symbolism. So he is building on that. That in turn builds on an older frequency of alliteration. But the encoding of it is his, and then taking that encoding and manipulating it so that you get overlap of these symbolic initials, whose very overlap is symbolic of the overlapping nature of these theological entities. That is, to me, cognitively very intricate indeed. There's even more I could go on. I mean, ultimately, if you look at the whole sequence of poems that's involved, and I can show, what some of the sequence is. It's interesting that there's a whole lot of binding going on toward the end of the poem, namely the evil ones will get tied up in hell. This is known. This is an Indo-Iranian symbolism of being bound down. I just received a volume in which I have an article, but someone just talks about that particular motif in the Rig Veda. And then if you go to Yasna 49, which contains a lot of this material, a lot of the groups of sequences of words, family, community, clan, the word yasa, entreat, and some other stuff, you see that, and the word raz, meaning bliss, of which vrasma is a form, I say a word, root vraz. You get all of them in Yasna 49, 7, and 8, and I can show you how the sequence of stanzas there is related to the sequence of stanzas here. I can, in short, do a scrim between the two. But what is interesting is we're in Yasna 49, which picks up from this triad, family, community, clan, social triad, and the word rasma, and the root sar, which means to connect, which is used of the relationship between Mazda Hura and Wahumana in the second stanza, where you have the word saremno, which means either connected or united. You have the phrase for Frau Schaustra, one of his chief patrons, bring about that nexus with rightness in thy divine dominion. The word dominion is here too. So the idea begins to emerge, and this can be shown from other passages in Yasna 49 and some other poems, that Zarathustra has not only a theological description, that is to say, the Godhead has different aspects which are nevertheless of the same nature and nevertheless interconnected, but also an eschatological doctrine, whereby the souls of the righteous human being will be in the afterlife part of that blissful interconnection of the aspects of the divinity, which is to say that the soul of the righteous will be integrated in a union with the divine entities. And the integration is expressed as ties. Ages ago, I wrote an article in which I said this. Never mind the fact that I said it in a terribly complicated manner, and I didn't have all my data. I knew about the ring composition. I called it the ties that bind, which sounds a little cliche, but I think it's all the less apt, meaning there are ties that are good, ties of the divine entities to each other, and potentially of the righteous human soul to that interconnection, that divine interconnection, on the one hand, and ties of the evil to immobility, to hell, to death, whatever you want to call that. And I would like soon, I have a deadline end of March, to write an article for a volume on magic, edited by Ezio Albrile. Ezio Albrile is, he likes magical stuff. So he invited me to write an article. I don't know how visible it'll be, but it'll get me started at least on that binding aspect of Yasna 32. And what I plan to say there is that the end of Yasna 32, whereby Zarathustra looks to a time when he can relax, knowing that the evil ones will be tied up because of their violations against the righteous. That expression of the evil ones being bound up is poetic expression of what is very much characteristic, in some ways, even one can say the most salient part of a lot of ancient magic, which is the binding spell, whereby through words, one brings about in some way the binding of the opponent. We have a very clear binding spell in the Avesta, where somebody is to make a furrow or a series of furrows around himself, which is to say, encloses himself in a magical circle so that the evil is outside of the magical circle. This is a well-known aspect of ancient magic, this encirclement. And once he draws these circular furrows around himself, he says, I bind thee, or I am binding thee, which is I prefer I am binding thee to I bind thee. I am binding thee, whatever demonic entity you are, whatever Druj demonic entity you are. And there's already before that a list of the kinds of demonic entities that exist. So this is very, very clear, a binding spell made with a magical ritual. I think that there's something of that binding spell, which is very known, very well known in the Greek world and the Mesopotamian world and the Latin world and so forth. Um, so there's evidence of that in the Avesta. And I think that Zarathustra uses that multivalent idea of binding to make his poem, among many other things, a very sophisticated, carefully composed binding spell. End of sentence, Olga.
Yeah. So on one hand, you have those binding spells, and on the other hand, high-level theological abstraction. So I have a question
In this
then.
poem.
Yeah, in this poem.
Yeah, to say a
Yes.
binding spell kind of reduces it to its to a basic. And
No,
this
it
poem is
it
far from
doesn't
basic. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't reduce it,
Okay.
but uh, uh, let's say, so two questions. For example, if you look at Vedas, and maybe not Vedas, but early Upanishads like Brihadaranyaka, you have a cosmos which is highly magical, highly mythological, inhabited by all kinds of deities and even things like sun or mountains in this cosmos. They are all animated. They all have those mythical qualities. Now, Cassirer suggests that mythical thinking is a certain kind of intelligence, certain kind of thinking, certain cognitive style, you may say. So I'm not saying that abstraction has to be reduced to magical thinking, but I'm wondering how is it possible to have in one person, in one head, the range of intelligences from highly abstract to absolutely magical, like magical spell. Is it compatible?
Okay. I can answer that.
Okay.
You have a very remarkable individual, not an awesomely intelligent man who is located within a culture and has a cultural background upon which he builds. And he tends to be, if you look at composers, he's a maximalist. He's not a minimalist composer. He's a maximalist. He likes to get different things going and coordinating, and to coordinate them. So, yeah, and the background of his culture is this binding spell idea. He's already talking about the binding down of the evil. So you have halfway there. And he's speaking in the first person and he's addressing a divinity. So you have the elements of a binding spell, but at a much more complex level and from a viewpoint of composition, more intricate, more sophisticated than the crude, simple binding spell. Incidentally, I'll point out in this paper that in Old Norse and Welsh and an Iranian language, Ossetic, the same Indo-European root to bind forms the word for magic. So magic is a binding. Sever in Old Norse. Oh, is it Old English? I have to check. Sever. Sever is. No, I have to check. Wood in Welsh and have to check the aesthetic word, something. But so magic, so the word for magic etymologically is binding. And that particular root is involved very much in this poem. Not only at the end, where Zarathustra says, so that I may bind those evildoers who want to harm the righteous, uses that same root to bind, not the root band, which means to bind, but the root Indo-European term sie or something like that, sei, whatever that is. But in the middle of his poem is the word haiti, which means binding in terms of the kind of concentric composition he's using. Hence, haiti is an individual Gothic poem. That's what the word haiti means. And within the ring composition, the center with the word haiti connects with this last word of the poem, Ahaya, Hayaya, may I bind. And so he literally connects the idea of his poem with the idea of binding at the end in a negative sense. And his complaint is that the evildoers wish to co-opt his haiti in some way. It gets a little more complicated because the word haiti can also mean merit from a different root. So they want to co-opt his merit as they want to co-opt either his words or actually both his words and his future reputation, srawa. So that is literally, and this is in your court, Lou, that haiti is in the middle of the poem. So there, contra what I said before, indeed, in the center of Yasna 32, you have the word haiti, concatenating poem, concatenation, which ties up within the structure of the poem, the ending word, I will bind up. No. So I'm glad you're recording this, Olga, because it's an awful lot, and somehow I'm at the moment able to articulate these things. There's always a ball or two that drops from my juggling of ideas as I talk, but I think here I kept the main balls in motion. Yes?
Lou, do you mind if I ask one more question?
Oh, ask.
No, Louis is okay, right, with it?
Unless Louis, yeah, why don't you ask, Olga? And then if
Okay.
Louis has a question, he can ask.
Okay.
I'm totally fine because I have a few questions myself. Yeah, go ahead.
Eeny,
Okay,
meeny. Olga, why
okay.
don't you ask? And then Louis.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So just in the moment it I'm afraid evaporated
You
while I
want
was
to think
listening to
about it?
Louis. Yeah, I want to think a
Go ahead,
little.
Louis.
All right. So one of the key things, we're starting with the first stanza, is holding back those who are inimical to you. Um, but he's addressing everyone, an entire community, and according to at least Insler, the gods. Now, what is his notion of the gods?
His Insler's or his Zarathustra's?
I don't care about Insler. I mean, I'd
Well,
like
but
to
it's quite
understand
relevant. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
what you think. The when we're talking I assume the evil ones are a combination of people, people within the community, as well as perhaps their leaders or their divinities. So he does Zarathustra here recognize that there are divinities aside from Ahura Mazda who have power.
Um, it's a good question. Um, the correct and impeccable answer is I don't know. But let me talk around that for a while, uh, because there are a number of pieces here, of which one question I think is very important. So let's start with the late Stanley Insler's translation of the word Daiwa as gods. It's an atrocious translation, a totally misleading, irresponsible translation. What is the poor reader to make of that? Is the poor reader to understand, and some do understand, that behind his translation, gods, is the scholarly notion that the word Daiwa in Iranian meant gods, meant God, as it does in, say, Sanskrit Deva, most saliently Deva, or Old Latin Deus, from which you get Deus in classical Latin, and Lithuanian and what have you. So there was an idea that Zarathustra, in demoting other divinities, demoted the word for God. Now, if that, and I think that is Insler's assumption, then it's still irresponsible to say it means God. I once thought of the idea of godling or something like that. However, I can show that the idea that the demotion of the word Daiwa is something that took place way before Zarathustra, which is to say that the word Daiwa in Zarathustra's world, in the world in which Zarathustra grew up, just means a demon, doesn't mean a god. And what I think happened was that, you have very close cultures which are very close to each other, linguistically and ideologically. These cultures were rivals to one another. It's very clear that there is one group which survived until fairly recently in history in Afghanistan, who used to be called by Muslims, the kafirs, meaning those who don't acknowledge God. They were pagans in the 19th century in Afghanistan, whose rituals correspond precisely to an Avestan description of an enemy group. So we know that there was one adjoining culture, a culture adjoining the Iranians in Central Asia, and at some point the ancestors of the Vedic culture before they went to India were also a rival group. And we know that a god like Indra, big time divinity in the Rig Veda, is a demon in Iran. We also know that words which are positive in Vedic and in the Kafiric languages of Afghanistan, you can call them Nuristani today, Nuristan, land of light, but it was once Kafiristan. The word for I is a positive word, but used in the Iranian texts, it's the eye of an evil being. So there was a dualism in Iran, even at the linguistic level, but certainly a demotion of the gods of the other bunch. And as part of that demotion, which took place before Zarathustra, the word Daiwa, which had meant God, was demoted. It's what that other bunch uses for their gods. We're not yet getting to your point. So there is an address to demons. It's complicated because, as you suspected, and I think I can show this, family, community, tribe. Well, there's the good family community tribe, and there is the evil family community tribe. I can give a bit of proof of that if you ask shortly. But what about these Daiwas? Are we talking about human beings who are demonic? Or is there a separate category of entities which are Daiwas? And I think that is the case. They're demons, they're not gods, and they are addressed in the third stanza where Zarathustra says, At yush Daiwa, but use Daiwas. So when he does address these Daiwas, and we can see from Yasna 30 that there's the evil spirit, there are the demons that he leads astray, and they're the human beings that are led astray by the demons. That the demons seem to be a category of evil entities. I'm tempted to say supernatural entities, but that may skew it in a wrong way. The question comes down to whether Zarathustra believed that these entities have a real existence in themselves, or are they only bad products of the human mind? Now, Yasna 32, the poem we're reading, Where does he say? Yeah, but Atyush Daiwa in the third stanza, all of you, Wismangho, are in lineage or obviously from bad mind and from wrongness and from contempt. What does that mean, you're from bad mind? The late Ilya Gershevich said, Zarathustra says that they're just Hirngespenst, like apparitions of the brain, and that they have no existence outside of being wrong thoughts in the human mind. That may be. It may also be that Zarathustra thought that these evil entities, which you can easily equate with the divinities, with the false divinities of other groups, that they do exist. I don't know. I would like to follow Gershevich because I'd like my view of Zarathustra to be optimal, but I don't know. It's a good question. Certainly, Gershevich's idea, is using the third stanza as evidence for their not really existing outside of the human mind. It's strong. Whether or not it's convincing, I don't know. It's interesting that, Zarathustra doesn't mention any other divinity, but his divinities, which are all Ahuras, and the chief one is Mazda Ahura, but he doesn't mention, apart from a common noun meaning some kind of contract, he doesn't mention Mithra. He doesn't mention several other important divinities of the ancient Iranians. And he doesn't mention them except generically as demons, because he doesn't want to. Why doesn't he want to? Because if his poetry is to survive, if it's to be passed down through the millennia, then he doesn't want to keep alive in memory, in recitation, in allusion, the names of these evil entities. It's interesting. You have a kind of difference between Jewish apologetics and Christian apologetics. The church fathers detailed beliefs they didn't like. Before we had actual documents of Gnosticism, we hardly had anything. We had Pistis Sophia, but we didn't have the Nag Hammadi corpus yet. Yet we knew what a lot of the heretics, the Gnostics, call them, as far as mainstream Christians went, the heretics. We know what they said, pretty much, because the church fathers, Hippolytus, Irenaeus, there's another one, forget him for the moment. They detail these things they believe that this and this and this. So the stuff, in a way, is preserved. The Jews spoke about minim, those heretics, and just what they believed, they don't say. It's like, don't give them any, don't even talk about them except generically. So I think Zarathustra had the same idea. You don't want them preserved. Just call them demons. That'll do it. What's the index, the indicator of this? Well, if you look at Yasna 32:3, says, you demons are from evil mind. Aka mana. He doesn't say angramanyu, which is to say the hostile spirit, in effect the devil, which is frequent in the Younger West. Angramanyu. That's the Persian Ahriman. That is what Zarathustra would have called the devil, but he doesn't. Nowhere in the Gathas do you find that phrase, Angra Manu. You find the Manu who is Angra. That's something else. It's not the fixed name. It's a kind of paraphrase of the fixed name. Or the Manu who is evil. And various ways of getting around saying Angra Manu, to the extent that he even speaks of Angro Magnete, the one who is thought to be evil. But he's not saying Angra Manu. So he avoids this very important aspect of his you could say theology of his religion, because he does not name the devil, but people knew what the name of the devil was. It survives, in Younger West, where they didn't have any compunctions about mentioning the name. And within our text, his particular bête noire among the false gods, Hauma, is alluded to phonically, but not really explicit, because he says in Yasna 32:10, last I looked at it. Now I'll just read you the way it was pronounced. Haumana Srawa Murandat. Ye achishtim wainang he augada gam ashibia hawarcha yascha dothing drigwato dadat yascha wastra wiwapat yascha wadar woishdat ashaune. So in that first phrase, how ma na, overtly it means how. That guy, ma, moreover, equals Sanskrit sma, or it could be ma, meaning me. No, that man ruins, not ruins, makes go astray or makes go to the wrong place, utterances, makes utterances, deflects utterances or derails utterances or derails reputations. What man is that? And then he tells you what man he's talking about. If, however, you read the first two words, hauma, as hauma, meaning via hauma, then via hauma, a man does the following things. And he lists what bad things the man does. And if you look at the phraseology, there are some words here that occur, and some, moreover, that occur uniquely only in what has been preserved as in the young, so-called Younger Westen, hymn to Halma Yasta 9, where indeed you get the phrase, you get the word Wojda, you get a Shaune, you get Wadar, you get Ashibia, Wainanhe. In short, he's taking a known text, taking the words of a known text, shaking it up, doing a little jazz improvisation, and knocking it down. People who hear this will hear the echoes of the Hamyasht, of the Yashta Halma. In short, Zarathustra knew the earlier form of the Halmayasht and lampooned it, lambasted and harpooned and lampooned it. And because I know exactly what text he lampooned, I can say, I can show at least what is the older part of that text. The way we have it's already, as it were, Zoroastrianized. But there's a good chunk of it that metrically scans in a series of 8-syllable verses, octosyllabic verses. And there you have mention of male and female daiwas in a pejorative context. So there's the smoking gun for daiwa before Zarathustra, having already meant a demon. Ah, yes, the word ashi too. It's in the Hamyash. That's the word for the eye of an evil person. So that's something interesting, I think. Yeah.
I think that this is somewhat closely related to Lou's question. So Zarathustra invented paradise, right? For example, if comparing with the destiny of the soul in Greek antiquity, the soul just goes to Hades and hangs out there with other souls, semi-rational, for eternity. And there, whether you are good or bad, it's the same story. And very rarely somebody who wins the favor of gods gets to Olympus, but that's not paradise and not for everybody.
Okay. Look, as far as the idea of the afterlife and rewards and maybe also punishments, you can't, I don't think you can make a simple statement about ancient Greece. There are different periods. There's the archaic period and the classical period. And the evidence for that is, I think, complicated. What Hades is and so forth and so on. If you look at the Bible. It's also complicated. I mean, there's Sheol, the pit, never mind the etymological meaning of Sheol, which may have to do with using the underworld as some underworldly gizmo as an oracle. Never mind that. That's no. It's a complication. But what is Sheol? What is what's going on there? There's sort of vague souls who are not quite there, who are not quite conscious, or who just maybe have feelings, but they're looking for a body, or it's very vague indeed. Sometimes you have explicit statements, like in the Psalms, which I think consist of various chronological strata. You have Lo Ametim Hallelujah. The dead shall not praise God, nor those who've gone down to the underworld. Lo Ametim Hallelujah. So they're dead. It was, and I think there's a kind of vagueness in Mesopotamia too, as far as the afterlife of the souls is concerned. But I'm not an expert. But I think if you ask an expert, the expert would probably hem and haw, and rightly so. What I do think is that there were always strains of hope and belief that maybe in some way we survive death in some form. I'd like to think so. But then I'm a human being with a human fear of death. But it was the contact with Iranian culture. Heck, Israel and Judea were part of the Persian Empire. So it wasn't so remote, where you have the idea of righteous going to heaven and wicked going to hell. And that made its impact on the Jewish world in a certain period very strongly, where you have dualizing tendencies, such as in the Dead Sea Scrolls. What happens to that in Judaism? It's complicated. I mean, there were in the 19th century Jewish preachers, Magidim, who preached hellfire and all sorts of stuff like that. So it doesn't become, however, doctrinal in Judaism at the end. It's there, but it's not doctrinal. But the idea that you do have within a certain period of ancient Judaism, certainly inherited in early Christianity, of an eschatology, an individual eschatology, in which the righteous go to paradise and the wicked to hell. That is an influence of Zoroastrianism. Now, if you go back not to Zoroastrianism, but to Zoroaster, which is not the same story, that eschatology is clear in the Gathas. But You ask, did he come up with that? Or you might ask. And then the answer is murky. He systematized it for sure, and it fit his dualism. And yes, I think he innovated in stressing that, in foregrounding that, and in detailing it as far as individual eschatology is concerned. General eschatology, it's there, but it's not very much detailed. So, what was there before Zarathustra? Was there a view of the afterlife? There may have been something, but I don't think it was formulated. Um, in the Rig Veda, there are passages in which, let's say, Yama uh, plays a flute in a very nice place. I don't remember all the details, but it's like it seemed, and Yama being the god of the dead, it seems that there is a sort of afterlife there, and that Yama is a ruler of the dead. So that means that the dead have an existence, as it were, in the realm of Yama. Not much about it is said. There are hints of that, and it doesn't become a very central idea, I don't think, in the Rig Veda. It's only with Zarathustra that it is systematized, and that indeed, for me, is the essence of the Gathas, the idea that the world was constituted in the beginning so that in the end, there are rewards and punishments. So, protology, the beginning of things, foreshadows eschatology, the end things, and the dualistic reimbursements, as it were, are very much there in the Gathas. More than that, I don't think one can say. I can't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have one more question, but I don't know if we have time for it, or shall we save it for the next conversation?
Time. What is time? Yeah, go ahead.
Time. How about Louis? Lou, are you okay with me asking?
You know that Peter
Yeah,
Lorre?
sure. I have to go soon, but I'm
Okay,
very
go ahead.
interested
Olga
in the
asked a question.
discussion because I think the nature of what the message is in spirituality is, key. It's very important.
Okay, Olga?
Yeah. So regarding the nature of the message in spirituality, so I think, and I may be wrong, that Zarathustra has or gives us unique direction of thinking about spirituality as a communal enterprise. Like if I compare it, for example, again with early Upanishads, the focus is on the self, the nature of the self, not just individual salvation, but the metaphysical essence of the self. Now in Greece, again, I'm just trying to work off the Indo-European religions that I'm familiar with. You'll correct me because I know I'm not correct here.
It's things, it is especially with regard to ideas of the soul and the essence and what survives death and so forth, that across the board, the terms shift a little. What is a ruach? What is a nefesh? What is a neshama, for example? In Hebrew, it's intricate. It keeps on moving around. So I think,
Yeah, yeah, but
all you can say is synchronically, descriptively, in the Gathas, you have a Ruan, a soul, you have some kind of dhyana, which is an envisionment, an inner consciousness, and outside of the Gathas, you have something called the Frawashi. It goes on and on. So you can't, it's hard even to talk about ancient Greece because they're different strata, let alone go from Indo-European
but
up
I
to that.
know
It's
I
hard.
know I'm simplifying, but there is a radical and essential difference in the emphasis, which is in the Gathas. It's a well-being of community. It's divinity as a community of divine principles, uh, and then of course there is this idea of individual salvation going into Ahura Mazda's house, but nevertheless the whole topic is about otherness very much.
I think,
While
I think, I think this is should be discussed separately because,
okay,
how communality plays in here. I don't know. One more thing I'll say, by the way, when you talk about archaic Indic magic, you have to refer to the Atharva Veda, which is big time about
I
magic.
know I know Atharva Veda very poorly, but
Lots
yeah,
of magic.
okay, yeah, yeah, okay.
And so, Lou, you got to go. I can't hear you. Can you?
Lou, unmute yourself.
On mute. I was muting myself because I didn't want the noise of the house.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh, there, basically, I what Olga is asking is intriguing to me because there's a notion of the community, and also there's some. I'm in looking at Yasna 32. There's seemingly a concept of free will that you have to
mm,
choose to uh,
Absolutely.
to think right,
Absolutely.
and that is an
Absolutely.
important. That is a huge, huge.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
fit.
You're
It's
100. You're 132% right
yeah.
there.
That comes across
And
very powerfully,
and
even in this
choice.
terrible
Yeah. In
translation.
Yasna 30, the choice is that at the level of spirit, at the level of
Yeah,
mind,
yeah.
so that
So that's
you
an
get
important. That's a
yeah, and
really,
it is
really
that
important
choice
innovation.
which brings about the nature of the two spirits. Each
Yeah.
one chooses rightness, and the other chooses wrongness. Um,
Right.
and the Daiwas make the wrong choice, and human beings have to make the right choice.
Yeah.
And
And
that is very much stressed in Yasna 30.
yeah,
Um,
and the other thing that again, it's a question in my mind, is that when we're thinking about these spirits and good thought and bad thought, there could be a sense of the spirit as outside that you choose, or that these spirits are within you and
yeah.
you are actually battling cognitive tendencies that are inside you
I think
versus
that is correct.
outside. So I think that gets at Olga's question about the self and the community. And
I agree. Yeah.
that is an interesting concept.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, what I would love for you to do at some point is actually to read the Gathas, so we could sort of hear what is going on in the assonance and in the wordplay. I
And
think
the wordplay that I can tell you about, it's hard to do.
no, the wordplay is deep, but it'd be interesting to
I
hear
mean,
what the
I
listeners
could
the listeners
use
were.
words like cleave,
Yeah.
which,
In
you
any
know,
case, I do have to go. Thank you. It's good to see you both.
okay, good, good.
Stay
Yeah,
well.
you too. So I hope we
You
see each
too.
other
Yeah,
next week and have a good meanwhile.
right. But I think
Yeah.
those questions about the message are really quite
Oh,
interesting.
yeah. Now, what you articulated now, that's very important. Now, with its regard to
Okay.
choice, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Great.
Okay. Sei mir gesund. Seid mir beide gesund. Okay.
Okay. Stop recording. Stop recording.
Okay. Yes.